Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Well, this week, from Greenland to Gaza, from 25% tariffs to a 30-day reprieve. Well, the roller coaster ride continues as Canada ponders its next step. So today, as we do from time to time, a perspective from the millennials/Gen X generation. Younger than me is all I'm saying, okay? Like, take the boomers out and see who says what. So we are inviting, as we have before, Tara Henley, journalist, author, broadcaster. Her podcast is Lean Out with Tara Henley. She wrote a book called Lean Out, a meditation on the madness of modern life. You might want to pick a copy of that up, seeing as we're in the middle of that. And Matt Gurney joins us. Longtime journalist and broadcaster, you'll remember, is writing from the National Post. But he too has a podcast and an online, co-founded The Line in 2020. That's getting to be quite some time. So that is are you a Substack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
So I always get the language mixed up. Now, usually Derek Fildebrandt from Western Standard is with us, but he had to jump on a plane at the last minute. So we're going to encourage and add the vote of and the voice of Alberta as we go along. Welcome to you both. You got a lot on your shoulders this morning. Okay. So I was listening to Jean Charest, who said, following, that the U.S. may have actually done us a favor because now we have no more excuses. If we hadn't been paying attention for the last 20 years, or 10 years, we have to now. The Americans may have done us a favor because now we have to get our own house in order, grow up, solve some of these problems that are not only bugging Donald Trump, but we should be doing for our own sake. Sounding a lot like Daniel Smith, Premier of Alberta. Let's just have a conversation. Let's hear what the guy says, see what we can do. So, Matt, let me go to you to begin.
I don't disagree. The question that I would have is whether or not the Canadian state can save itself. And here I am really front loading all the optimism and charm I'm known for in this recording. But look, Pam, you mentioned a minute ago, the line's been around since 2020. Think of those 5 years. Just think of the things we have covered. A literal plague that killed tens of thousands of us, a series of wars and military crises, series of political crises, the Emergencies Act, all of foreign interference. I am in no way convinced. You know what? That's too polite. I am convinced we would not handle a single one of these things any better if they happened again. There is obviously, especially around public health, okay, we'd have more learned experience, right? We've had lived experience of being in a pandemic, so our nurses and doctors, God bless them, would do a little better responding. But in terms of institutional capacity, it seems to me that every struggle we've had over the last 5 years, rather than leading to like a battle-hardened Canada that sort of focused and got to work, what we've done instead is we've sort of exhausted our accumulated stores of patience and political capital and its institutional capacity, and we haven't replenished any of them. Now, probably to an extent, we all just need a civilizational vacation, a couple of weeks at the beach with a six-pack and a good book. But, you know, can we think of a single Canadian institution that has undertaken significant structural reforms in the last 5 years in response to a series of unrelated indicators that are telling us that the world is turning nasty? I can't really think of any.
Well, and you raise a good point. I mean, as a country, we apparently hired somebody to do a COVID audit to see what we did learn. And that report is secret. Yeah. It's a little like what we saw last week with the Oak Commission. You know, we're going to look at foreign interference and whether or not we have traitors in our midst, but we're not going to talk about it or tell you anything about that. So it's hard to learn if you don't kind of do the homework and then say, okay, here's 6 things we're going to do differently. So just, Tara, let's go to you and get your general comment on this as we begin the discussion.
I am a naturally optimistic person. I am finding that optimism very tested at this point in time. when I look around at our country, it's sort of like a layer cake of insanity and chaos with like a nice icing of crazy on top. There's just so much. Every file that you look to, we've touched on a few already today, is in shambles. And the transparency issue, I think, is particularly important for us to pay attention. We cannot take an honest look at what's going on in this country and how we move forward if we don't have the information. It's just really crippling us that the government is so frankly secretive as it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm puzzled. I mean, there's two sides to that coin. One is, we're not going to tell anybody anything because you don't have the right to know, or it might embarrass us if you find out, or it's none of your business. I think it's some combination of all three on the part of the government. But the other point is the one you raised, Matt, which is state capacity. It's not clear that we have it. And I don't think it's as simple as everybody working from home, because most of the job creation in this country, about 40%, has been hiring more civil servants. So there's warm bodies. It's just, do we have the capability to have new ideas and implement them?
Even the people on the inside increasingly are saying no. People within inside the federal civil service have been talking about how it's drowning in processes and review and protocols, but that the actual ability to take new proposals and action them is something that we as a state have seen wither. I try not to make this a partisan complaint, because it's not even a complaint I level entirely at the federal government. I mean, try booking a family health appointment in Ontario these days. My wife and I and our two kids, we have family doctors. Can we get in with them? It's a crapshoot. Yeah. And if you can, and you get referred out to a specialist, well, then God help you. Like, that's just a whole other layer of dysfunction here. Could the federal government today, hypothetically speaking, because I know like the prime minister's announcement about what we'd offered Mr. Trump was just a masterclass of very careful wording. But if Mr. Trump were to demand not just 10,000 troops or agents or whatever on the border, but an additional 5,000 in terms of what we've already deployed, because I think that's the cute little thing the prime minister did. I think we're including all the people who are nominally assigned to border guard duties already in our count. If we had to come up with 5,000 extra people in the entirety of the Canadian federal government, in the entirety of this coast to coast to coast country of 41 million people, I don't think we could do it. It took us weeks during the convoy to mobilize enough police officers to clear out Ottawa. We had to fly them in from Vancouver. Like, these guys had to cross the Rockies in order for us to actually get enough cops in one place to do a job that really shouldn't have been that complicated. The actual amount of state capacity we have in this country, despite massive numbers of bureaucrats and consultants, the actual guys on the ground, if you look at many of our key capacities, healthcare, defense, policing, the court system, most of these guys are operating well below 100% of their nominal authorized strength. Vacancies abound. The bureaucracy has grown. I'm just not sure what anyone's actually doing.
Well, and that does, I don't know how many studies in my time at the Senate and even before as a journalist that I've either read or participated in about the problem that we've got is we are strangling ourselves with red tape in this country. And we can all cite, Bill 69 and the clean fuel tax, and you just go on and on and on. I'm old enough to have been through round one, which was NEP, the National Energy Program in Alberta. We've been doing this for a long time, strangling ourselves with regulation and then being surprised that nobody, including Canadians, want to invest in this country, build a company in this country, hire some people in this country to create the kind of economic activity we need to pay for some of these things that we haven't been doing, like our defense bills, for example. Go at it, Tara.
Mm-hmm. Even if you want to look at banking, I had Andrew Spence for an interview this week. I know you've spoken to him before too, Senator. And I just found it so fascinating to look at the multiple layers just within the banking system in which we are hobbling ourselves. Investment in small businesses, very, very high fees, high investment fees. I mean, all kinds of just areas, just in that one sector where we're really doing ourselves a disservice in this country. These things get so entrenched and it's very difficult to see the way out of them, but surely it's possible.
Well, for 20 years, we've been talking about the importance of a national regulator. For probably 50 years, we've been talking about taking down internal trade barriers. I mean, some of the things that we have learned here, if everybody's going to play by the rules, a trucker coming from BC to Ontario would have to change the tires on his truck 4 times. Okay, that's how crazy the actual rules are. People sort of turn a blind eye to some of it. But what is, if not this, or maybe this will be, I'll just ask you that, Tara, do you think this is enough? Do you think the threat of tariffs and this ongoing battle, and I know it hurts Americans as much as it hurts us, and retaliatory tariffs hurt us too, and not them so much. Like, is this the moment where we're going to say, okay, we got to fix a bunch of stuff?
I'm certainly hoping that it is. There's been a number of moments over the last 18 months that I would have thought would be the catalyst for making real and significant change. I'm not convinced that it will be, but I certainly hope that it will be. I think what's heartening is that you're starting to see a real kind of movement within the citizenry to reject the status quo and to try, and especially with the tariffs, there seems like there's a sense of national unity that I haven't felt in a while. And hopefully that national unity will spur actual, politically connected action that will make a difference on some of these issues.
That's an interesting point, and I think I noted it, that I read a post the other day on X from a young woman. I think she does some writing for the Hub as well. I don't have it right here with me. And she basically was saying to dear government officials, you're not doing a good job here, right? We don't buy into your trade wars. We don't just fix our defense system and do what we're supposed to do. Just, make some progress on internal barriers and let's get it done. So, Matt, do you think it's there? Do you think this public push behind will have any impact? He's going to be pessimistic again, aren't you? I'm kind of with you on this, Matt, but you go ahead and say it.
Here's how I approach this. I want to be with Tara on this one. Tara, I want you to be my leader. I want to line up right behind you and you take me to the promised land. I want to do it. Here's why I'm having a problem. We all know that past performance is not a guarantor of future results, but past performance is a pretty good place to start. The most disruptive event of my life, and I think the lives of most living Canadians, was especially the first 12 months or so of the COVID-19 pandemic. I cannot imagine something that was more culturally, socially, economically, and politically disruptive than that. It would take something pretty spectacular to come out of Washington to even equal the social, political, cultural, and economic disruption of that. I don't want to tempt fate, so I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it would take a lot. Can either of you guys tell me what structural reform we've implemented since COVID in response to it? So if that whole, not leaving my house for months thing didn't lead to structural systemic reforms, I'm not convinced slightly more expensive salad kits from Metro during the winter is going to do it.
Yeah. Don't you think, Matt, that there's a bit of a cumulative effect as well? I mean, when you talk to journalists who have covered countries where massive political changes happen, what they talk about is that dynamic of complacent citizenry and then that escalating to a very enraged citizenry without action. And then some kind of match lights that tinder on fire. And you never know what that specific incident could be. It's unpredictable, but that incident comes and ignites sort of social change in a big way. I feel like we've got the tinder, we've got the smoldering flames, and we're just waiting for that extra push, maybe the gasoline on the fire. But it feels like something is quite combustible in this country right now.
I agree. And to your look, yes, it happens. I've spoken to people who grew up or still live in countries where it did happen. And like they have fascinating experiences of, I got on the bus one day and I looked around and I realized the people I was riding with were ready for change. And I realized I was too. So like these things can happen in the human spirit. But the problem, Tara, here, and I say this obviously tongue in cheek, but all of the language you use to describe it is terrifying because you just described gasoline-soaked Tinder. Like I was hoping more for like a program review, maybe some civil service reforms. I don't know. Like a line item budget analysis. Yeah. Like, I understand failure has consequences, and this is something I was saying just to someone recently this week, right? Because the issue of and I know, Pamela, I don't mean to preempt you here. I know we're going to get to it, but Mr. Trump was talking about like turning Gaza, into the 51st state. I guess we've been bumped to the 52nd, and like people are flooding my text messages and my group chats, and they're telling me how absurd it is. What I've been telling them, it's completely absurd, but it's not less absurd than every other Gaza plan I've heard for the last 30 years. Yeah. And I think, Tara, what you're talking about here is that the danger that I see is that this cumulative frustration you're talking about, and I'm with you, I feel it, I see it. I think the polling even tracks it. Mm-hmm. I think we can say this is not a vibe, this is empirical. The problem I have, though, is that there are three possible responses to it. One of them is sort of spontaneous societal and political reform. That's the good scenario.
Yes.
The lousy scenario 3, I'm going to skip 2 for now, is, gasoline-soaked Tinder. Yeah. The one I worry we're settling into is scenario 2, which is managing complacency, where an increasing number of people, and I do not exclude myself from this, are just writing off a lot of normal social and cultural functions looking at American healthcare. That just as an example, like I am so convinced that the Canadian healthcare system will not be reformed in time in order to eventually end up replacing the hips that I'm probably going to need replaced eventually, that I'm trying to figure out what is the best non-resident but still high-value U.S.-based health insurance plan so I can go to Buffalo and get a new hip slapped in.
Well, and we're still busy bragging about how this is one of the things that makes us more superior to Americans, is a healthcare system. We keep kidding ourselves about the actual state of where we're at. When you're talking about the gas-soaked Tinder, I mean,
and that was the optimist talking.
That I understand. I heard Daniel Smith at the beginning, and of course I'm a Western Canadian, so this rings with me, but saying Alberta's the bad guy, oil and gas are bad, we've got to stop production, it's dirty, it's ruining the environment, except when we're in a trade war with the U.S. Now you better step up and take it, off the table and do your bit as Canadians. And this is time for Team Canada. The Premier of Quebec says there'll never be, again, this week, there'll never be another pipeline go through this province as long as anybody lives. And I'm going, where were the people saying that doesn't sound very Canadian to me, and why aren't you taking one for the team and stepping up? This fight is making that division really stark. Matt?
You ask where the people are. Well, most of them are in the West. At least one of them, me, is in Toronto, because I've certainly noticed that. It's an interesting thing, too, because one of the things I noticed starting in November was an immediate tone shift in Quebec nationalists, soft or hard. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, they were like, hey, maybe this Canadian Federation ain't so bad. I've always thought Quebec separatism, and here I am, I'm probably going to provoke a national unity crisis saying this, so sorry. But I mean, I think for a generation or so, the threat of separation has been largely performative, and it's been an ability for politicians in Quebec to continually get more concessions out of Ottawa. And you can never let the flame die entirely because it's too valuable.
Right.
So every once in a while, you got to go like crack down on someone sending a text in English within Montreal or something. But
Yeah.
you got to always keep it burning. But it's been pretty performative. There would be no special deal for a French-speaking Quebec in an expanded United States. And if Canada is absorbed and Quebec opts out, well, then guess what, friends? You're now surrounded by even more Anglo-speaking people, and we care even less about your distinct culture. So I think there has been this real quick wake-up call among Quebec's nationalists that they're better in Canada than out of it, and they need that Canada to be awfully functional here. But then, Premier Legault this week, Team Canada has limits, I guess.
Yeah.
I had a suggestion and it was tongue in cheek, but you guys know those garden sprinklers that kind of go like, they hiss and then they go whack, 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 and they come back. I said, build a pipeline right to the Quebec border or put one of those on it and just spray all the oil into Quebec. Like just say, we can't build it through Quebec. We're building it right to the border. We're putting a big nozzle on the end of it. And then you do what you want with your share. Like I said, I don't know if this is in the spirits of national interest. I think Doug Ford will make a deal on pipelines after the election's over. Put the damn thing to Sarnia and we'll go from there.
Yeah. No, I think this has become, if nobody understood this before, we can't maintain our own independence. We can't keep our neighbor to the south supplied, and we sure as hell can't find new markets if we don't have ways to get that oil and gas somewhere else, out of the ground, and then eventually out of the country. I don't know why this is so hard for people to understand, but it does seem to be. So Matt, having just provoked a national unity crisis by saying we're going to take the oil to the border and just, spray it all over. What do you think? Because there, I thought actually Danielle Smith did not a bad job of going down, trying to interpret what the President of the United States means in that particular moment. This is a guy with the world's shortest attention span, as we've already noted. I mean, woke up, and he's going to save Gaza. He's going to go in and build it and turn it into the Riviera. And so maybe we'll get back to Greenland or maybe we won't. Maybe he's just moved on, right? And I also don't think anybody actually really thinks we're going to become the 51st state, Tara, but no. We're now having, this is now putting a lot of pressure on a lot of different, very weak points.
I agree with that. And I do think it is an opportunity to revisit a lot of our policies, to diversify where we are sending our goods, to take a look at who our trading partners are, and to get more serious in terms of investment in this country and to bring in sort of a new policy regime. I think there is an opportunity for that. I don't think that many people in this country would have expected the tariffs, but those tariffs are here now. They're part of a continuation that's been going on around the world. But this is my
point, Tara. Sorry to interrupt, but Donald Trump has been talking about this every day of the week for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Talked about it all through the campaign. And then when he was elected, said, they're coming. What part of that did we not hear?
Yes, exactly. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the broader shifts that are happening around the world. I had Jeff Rubin on the podcast just today talking about how the kind of globalization era and neoliberal economics is coming to a close. We in Canada have been very slow to recognize that global shift, and we are paying for it now.
Exactly. So we need to have this discussion. So let's say, Matt, I know this is one of your favorite topics, me too, defense spending. So I hear Mark Carney say we're going to make that magic 2% by 2030, as opposed to 2032 or 2035 or whatever it is. As we've just discussed, Donald Trump is a man with a very short attention span. When he imposed the tariffs on Mexico, they came out and said, we're sending 10,000 people to the border this afternoon. Whether they do or not is quite another question, but they respond in real time to what he's saying. For us to say, yes, we're going to get to that 2% by 2030, you're kind of looking at your watch going, he won't care about that.
it would be like your house being on fire and you announce the plan to evacuate your home by the spring of 2027. And
That's well said.
Yeah, that's very well said.
The problem that I have with all of this, though, is that, and Pam, honestly, like, I'm not going to hijack your podcast here and flip the mic on you. You would have a better sense on this, right? Like, one of the things that I worry about, and I mean this very sincerely, is that very smart, honorable, well-meaning people in Ottawa, in official Ottawa, don't understand that their job is to respond quickly sometimes.
Right.
And
you bet they don't.
And it's not that they're dumb. It's not that they don't get it. It's just they've been habitualized, I guess. I don't know if that's a word or not. I think it is. But it's sort of like, the appropriate response to a new development is to convene a task force, figure out which retired Supreme Court justices are available, write a report, file it, get another one to do a different report, talk with the premiers,
read the report, put the
have
report
an election,
on the
shelf. Pass a bill, get it to the very brink of, propose a bill, get it to the very brink of passage, prorogue Parliament, throw it out, start again 2 years later, accuse the opposition of not sharing your values. Like, in almost every other field of human endeavor, sensory input triggers response. Like if someone pinches me, I jump. If there's a loud noise, we turn and look. All of the danger signals that we need we're receiving. Like, it's not like we're not suffering right now from fog of war, right? This is not, man, we don't really know what we're dealing with here. It's just that, like, it seems like Canada, I'm kind of mixing my metaphors here, but we don't have a normal immune system response. And when presented with danger, instead of actually responding to it as if it was danger, we respond to it as if it was a call for papers for like a conference that was scheduled for 18 months. And I don't know exactly what we do about this, because I'm kind of beyond being angry about it. I'm beyond being personally affronted by it. It's so systemic in every branch of official Ottawa I've ever dealt with. And in fairness, most of the provinces I've dealt with are very similar. And don't get me started on the city of Toronto.
No, I won't get you started on that, but
I don't know what it would take to change this.
Well, that's kind of where I feel we're at on these, looking at the issue of productivity. There isn't a thoughtful person, economist, academic, business leader in this country who hasn't warned in the last 10 years, but longer, that we are in a productivity crisis, that we are not generating the kind of economic wealth for a lot of the reasons both of you have cited. We've got too much bureaucracy and we have no way to help people stretch out a longer, build plan because we're a smaller country while they create other markets. But we know this is fundamental. And we saw what happened after the big spend in response to COVID. And we're still dealing with inflation and debt levels and deficit levels that are extraordinary for a country our size. So it's not that there aren't actual facts for us to deal with here. So to Matt's point, Tara, like, are you feeling, I don't know that Canadians going to Tim Hortons instead of McDonald's is going to make a difference. And I think Tim Hortons is American owned anyway, but that's a whole separate question. Everybody is trying to do something, but I'm not sure that has the impact on the decision makers.
I'm not sure either. And I think this is a major question, is how to get through to the decision makers in this day and age. There's such a disconnect right now between the decision makers and the electorate, the citizenry. There's no connection there. And you hear it in the messaging, you hear it in the leadership race right now. There seems to be a real ignorance of where the public is at and what the public is thinking, and the need for just plain speaking above all else at this point. Yeah. I don't know how you bridge that gap, but I do think that gap is coming for them.
But that's kind of the page from the Trump book, talk about plain speaking. I mean, he doesn't leave any room for confusion about what he's going to do with bad guys coming across the border, or, money being misspent at USAID or whatever. Like he makes it so that even if you've been at work for 14 hours and you just flip on your phone on the way home, you're going to hear what he intends to do. And I don't hear that, Matt, here at a time that, as Tara says, we're in the middle of a leadership race. Parliament is we're who knows how long from an election, but this is when ideas should be colliding, clashing, and somebody should be responding.
We could do that, or we can just be angry at Danielle Smith. Like it's kind of like one or the other, right? Like I think Donald Trump gave us 30 days.
Yeah.
At the end of those 30 days, it will be fascinating to actually take stock and ask ourselves what was accomplished during them. Yeah. What did we use them for? We've got them. What are we going to do with them? And the first immediate sign that I had of how we were going to spend the 30 days was Francois Legault saying we're not building a pipeline. Yeah. So, during the early phase of the pandemic, and this is a little bit off the rest of my thesis, but the Canadian government actually did do something pretty remarkable. It wasn't perfect, and I know it was controversial, but they actually did design income supports that were aimed at individual citizens and at Canadian businesses. And they did that with remarkable speed. So that's a great example of state capacity that did exist. And then when vaccines began to arrive, they were fairly effectively administered. So we can occasionally do these things. It's just sort of figuring out what went right in that situation that allows us to do this. So in terms of our infrastructure for trade, internal trade or exports, in terms of our border patrol and law enforcement, in terms of our diplomacy, our soft power, in terms of our hard power, our military defense, does anyone have a plan to materially improve our capacity for these things in the next 45 days?
Yeah, or 30, which is
or what 30 or 6 months. Like I'm reasonable here. Like I understand that like you can't just go out and Amazon order a bunch of new tanks, but like there was this great thing, and guys, I won't take too much time with this, but it's my favorite story. A few years ago, the British Armed Forces realized they needed new pistols, and from the moment the tender was offered, they were able to go out, buy them for a few tens of millions of pounds. They bought 25,000 of them, and then they issued them to the units of the armed forces. Start to finish, 2 years, and it was about a 20 million pound program. Canada, around the same time, also decided we needed new pistols. We needed the same number, 25,000. We established an office with a $50 million budget and a 10-year timeline. So some of what we're seeing here is not accidental. It's like the system is actually performing as designed. Like these long delays and cost overruns are not coincidences. This is how we have designed the system to work. We just need to change that design. Now would be an amazing time to start that.
Well, this is my problem with the COVID response. I agree with you. That was stood up in record time, and it solved a whole lot of crises because people were being shut down at business and they were being locked in their homes. This is a different situation, but we're trying to impose the same rule. Let's have a COVID spending style plan to tell Alberta to keep their oil in the ground and for us not to buy, from our largest trading partner or sell to our largest trading partner, which is going to kill economic activity in this country, which we need more than ever at this moment. So you're right, it was a good response, but we can't just then use the same formula regardless of what the crisis is, Tara. So, to Matt's point, like can we think a new thought, learn the lesson, which is you can do something if you harness the resources of the federal government, say we have to solve this and keep people from starving to death during COVID. Can we use that mindset but with a plan that might actually fit the bill.
There needs to be more urgency, and we know that there needs to be more urgency. It's just a question of how do you jumpstart that urgency. And I do wonder, I don't want to be super hard on the media because I know all of us are working around the clock right now. Matt, you just did a whole podcast with norovirus, but I do think we in the media could do a better job of focusing on the big priorities, maybe letting go some of the smaller stories, the pet stories that everybody seems to be focused on, and instead look at the big national stories that we need to focus on and push a little bit harder, hold some feet to the fire a little bit more. I do think some of that urgency could come from us.
Yeah, I actually agree with that, because when I watch the questioning of the Liberal leadership candidates, or the others in the process, I'm pretty disappointed that we're not really trying to focus in on this issue, and get some answers there. I think what Donald Trump comes from, in part, like, these are long held views, but what we figured out, and I think what they figured out to some degree in COVID, is that when there's a crisis, when there's a disaster, if you can't make your own vaccine, and if you can't make your own masks, and if you can't buy any drugs, and then we have to rethink. Back to your point, Tara, about what Jeff Rubin talks about, and the globalized economy doesn't work in those situations, and we've lost all our own capacity. And Donald Trump says that on a larger. He wants to, that's what America first is. We're going to bring it all home. We're going to be self-sufficient. We're going to build a wall around the whole thing and decide who we like on any given day. Is there, and I know Polyev talks about it, Canada first, but do we need to get our mind around this and say, we have to read the same tea leaves that he's reading? Matt?
Yeah, I think we do. It would require a pretty fundamental shift in the entire Canadian psyche to do it.
Yeah.
This is something my partner Jen and I have been talking about at the line for a couple of weeks here. And Pamela, I hope you'll forgive me one word of salty language, but we've been calling it asshole nation. What will it take for Canadians to stop getting out of the mindset of we're the nicest people in the world? Everywhere we go, we're loved. Everybody puts the maple leaf on their backpack while traveling through a foreign land. It's basically a guarantor of your safety. What I joked was I want Canada's back to stop being a laugh line or an applause line, and I want to turn it into a threat. I want the entire world to be terrified when the Canadians show up. I want Donald Trump to go, I'm not going to tariff the Canadians. I don't need to deal with those psychos for the next 4 years. I want everyone in the world to basically think when they're sitting across from a Canadian negotiator, they're sitting across from someone who's going to give them a little ceremonial jar of maple syrup, shake their hand, tell a hockey story, and then slit their throat if they don't like what the proposal is. Like, the funny thing is, Canadians actually used to be this. Canadians used to be the tough, scrappy colonial guys who had a lot to prove. And then in the 1970s, we flipped a switch and was like, no, we want to be cosmopolitan global citizens. I want a bit of the psycho back, please. And I think it's possible to get it.
Is World War I, World War II. We were tough, and everybody knew we were tough, but we can't keep going back that far. We need some modern reference points.
Yes, and we're not going to out tough Donald Trump.
No,
that's not going to happen.
We can maybe out crazy him though.
I don't know. That's even a stretch. Okay, I want to just touch on a couple other things before our time runs out here. Matt, explain to me why nobody seems to really care about foreign interference in Canada. We've got this issue. Either the Prime Minister lied to us when he said there are, terrorists in our midst, or I don't know, nobody let Madame O have access to the information and she couldn't find it. But I don't know why we're not going a little bit more psycho about that.
You know what? It's a fantastic question, but I mean, I don't understand why we don't riot in the streets regularly about routine delays to medical care.
Yeah,
exactly. And almost everything else is downstream of that. So maybe we're too nice. Maybe we're too well fed. Maybe there's a great new documentary on Netflix we've been meaning to watch, and tonight seems free. I don't know, maybe I'm too tired because, as Tara said, I had noro and I still had to get my kid to hockey. So
I think we're overwhelmed. That's what
I do think that is part of it, but
Yeah.
we weren't really good at this pre-2020 either.
Yeah.
So I don't discount the overwhelm thing. You know, Pam, when you said a few minutes ago that, like, you know, back in COVID, the government locked us all in our homes for a bit. I'm not gonna lie. If the government wanted to lock me in my house for a couple of weeks and I could turn off my phone too, I'm open to it. I could use a week or two off.
Oh, I hear you.
But yeah, no, I think we are overwhelmed. And Tara, to your point, I do not dismiss the criticism of the media at all. I agree with it.
Yeah.
I think the media is overwhelmed. I think the readers are overwhelmed. I think the people we interview are overwhelmed. And I think the government's overwhelmed. But the problem is, at a certain point, if we start losing the ability to fix our own problems, and sorry, Pam, I'm not trying to dodge the question of foreign interference.
No.
I think this is the answer.
I know that I think it is too.
It's like, basically, we have two paths before us here. We either eventually catch a break, and we do get, though I was joking about before, 2 weeks on a beach with a six-pack, or we just steer this ship right into the shoals, and then we're all in the water, and that's how we wake up. I really would prefer one option or the other, but I don't think we're on the good course.
The overwhelmed question, and I actually like having this conversation with you guys because you are a different generation, but we all come from the world of journalism. And I'm thinking, you know, COVID is our reference point today. Like 9/11 is a big reference point for me. And when you think about the ability to cope and the ability to respond, and what I watched happen in New York City and across the United States and around the world, is that people responded and rallied. And I remember going to a meeting with some people who just said, you know, he wasn't yet mayor, but he was about to be. Bloomberg just said, nobody leaves this room without writing a big check. We've got that whole chunk, and he pointed out the window because we were in the area, said, we're going to rebuild that. We're going to rebuild it stronger. And we're going to show those sons of blah, 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 you know, that we mean business. Like, I'm kind of looking for that level of response, because I do think that it's a different kind of crisis, but it's a crisis. We have to deal with security. We have to deal with borders. We have to deal with our own economy. We have to deal with the healthcare system that's collapsing. Like, Tara, yes, the media, and I know you're going to be writing a book about this. You're in the process of that. Are you saying that's the media has to lead in some way and kind of had the blaring headlines, which is war is upon us? You know, let's respond. Like, it's the same question I keep asking, but what is going to be enough to light that fire under us to say we've got to do something? No kidding, no fooling. We really have to do something.
I don't know what it's going to take at this point. And when I think about the three different kind of historical periods you're talking about, so 9/11, existential threat, there was that rallying. COVID, I mean, just from a journalistic perspective, 9/11, and that was what my first story in the student press was 9/11. You know, 9/11, the media covered that story for 2 weeks every single day, right? Then COVID comes along. COVID is a very different kind of threat. The media, when I was at CBC, I think we lost count around day 300. We did COVID for 300 days in a row. The problem now is that you have not just a fragmented audience and a failing business model, you also have our own fragmented attention, because as we said off the top of this podcast, every file is in crisis. And so how do you juggle covering all of these different files, plus the very polarized public and the polarized media environment incentivizes us to go off on these wild goose chases and do these silly stories instead of really sitting down and going, okay, what are the 10 biggest issues in this country? That is what we are going to focus on. All of the other stuff, the identity politics on one side and the conspiracy theories on the other, that's shelved for a while. I mean, it's going to take that, I think, from the media for sure.
Matt, thought on that?
Yeah. I had a very weird media career. I got scooped right out of school. I was a blogger. I got thrown into an editorial board. I didn't have to do a lot of the really awful, crime scene or car accident scene reporting. That is kind of the often how people get in. I've done some of it, didn't have to do a lot of it, but I think probably all three of us have had the experience more than once in our media careers of interviewing someone who is in a state of profound shock, having just experienced something awful. And we've all had to learn how to do our job, but also be human beings.
Yep.
And I think all of us would recognize in someone we're speaking to signs of, again, shocked, but a profound shock, conscious, but not really present. What I'm not convinced is we recognize it in ourselves and in each other. A couple of weeks ago, Los Angeles was on fire and no one really seemed to care. And like I said a few minutes ago, the number of people who are dying for want of health care or of drug overdoses or in violent crimes or of homelessness is, by any rational standard, or even by the standard of recent Canadian history, it's really bad.
Yeah.
Are either of you shocked? Outraged? Like, I know on some level I should be, but the Leafs won last night. And I would recognize shock in the eyes of another. I don't always recognize it in the mirror when I'm shaving in the morning. Mm-hmm. So I don't know exactly how we're supposed to approach this, but like thinking of 9/11. I have this very vivid memory, not of the day of, but of the weekend after. 9/11 was a Tuesday, and on the weekend I was at like a golf driving range. And there were dozens of people all swinging the clubs, and no one was talking. And it was like no one, it was everyone was there doing exactly what I was there. They didn't know what to do with themselves. So they went to hit some golf balls, and no one knew what to say. And it was just this outdoor scene and the sound of clubs hitting balls and not a word being spoken. We were profoundly shocked and changed by that. If some idiot flies a plane into a building in the States today and 3,000 people die, we're all tuning in. We're all going to tweet about it. I think probably we just make dinner and go to bed. I don't know if we would be capable of being shocked that way anymore. And I suspect that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's actually a really important point because we don't recognize it in ourselves, whether it's journalists or the political leadership, but ordinary, everyday citizens that are working maybe 2 jobs in this country so they can feed their kids and then still trying to go to the hockey game. I don't know what shocks us. I was in Vancouver recently, driving down East Hastings. There's 15 blocks of junkies, zombies, homeless. Just it's hell. It's what you think of not happening in your own country. And the young Uber driver, Iranian, I don't know whether he was born here or came here at a young age, and he just. We fell into that silent mode looking at it. And then finally he said, I can't believe this is Canada. And I think there is some of that, Tara, that we're all going through. Just despite the shock and awe, we're in stunned silence.
I think that's very much it. And I'm from Vancouver. So hearing that just gives me quite an emotional reaction myself. I think most of us know people that have dealt with that, and I think it's that alone is such a huge crisis in this country, and that doesn't get a lot of attention. It isn't a major mainstream conversation in this country, right. And it's, as you say, the streets of where I'm from are deteriorating to a point where it looks like a zombie apocalypse. So, and Matt, to your point, I mean, how do you process all of these things at once? I think it's a huge, enormous challenge, and it's a challenge for the citizenry. And just to bring it back to what I was saying before, we have to be speaking more clearly. We have to get to a point where we are not getting bogged down in these reports and in this news speak and all of the stuff. And we're cutting to the chase of what's actually happening and trying to say it as clearly as we can and reflect that back to the public.
If I can just add one quick thought to that, I'm only going to say I saw a great meme the other day.
Mhm.
It says we're all plugged into pocket-sized glowing rectangles that are supercomputers plugged into a light-speed data network containing the entire sum of human knowledge, and it updates in real time. And we're all processing this with meat computers that were designed to eat berries in caves. So, like the rate that we are absorbing information is astonishing. The
Yeah.
first thing I do when I'm on vacation is I stop absorbing information at
Yeah.
anything faster than the speed of reading a book.
Hmm.
And I feel great. And then the horrors begin again when I go back to work.
Yeah. No, it's the only upside of being on an airplane is that, most of them don't have Wi-Fi access. And so, you actually have to read or watch a movie.
Yes.
Or just like close your eyes. We have been really a cheery lot here today. And and I'm so glad that we've had this, advice and comfort for the listeners and viewers here today. But I think kind of we've got there, which is, in the overwhelming nature of this, we've got to pick our moments as individuals where we pay attention, pick our own personal hills to die on, I guess, and see what's going to intrigue us and make us react so that we are actually responding to something that matters to us. So, wow.
And at least our listeners know that they are not alone, that we're all going through this together.
For sure, because I'm sure they're feeling that. But, okay,
Pamela, I just admire your optimism. I was teasing Tara earlier, but I just think you might feel worn down, you might feel exhausted at times, but you're still optimistic enough to think you're going to get to pick which hill you die on, and that ain't nothing.
Yes, that's very optimistic of me. I think you're quite right. I'm Pollyanna in person here. It's great. Okay, you two. It was a really good conversation. Tara Henley, journalist, author, broadcaster. So her podcast is Lean Out with Tara Henley. And she's she's nice. She's one of those nice Canadians. She doesn't say we should all be crazier like Matt says on the line. I don't think we want to be the first 51st state. I don't think we want to really get crazy, Matt. I read this yesterday. If we were the 51st state, we'd be the second poorest, just above Mississippi and just below West Virginia. So we really don't want to do that.
No, but that might be one of those hills we're going to have to pick then.
All right. So listen to Matt and his partner, Jen Gerson, on the line and take a listen. If you want to feel better, then listen to Tara and she'll give you some happy news and I'll give you some of both. Okay. So we'll see you again next week for another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Bye for now.